Back when I graduated out of school, there was no jobs here available in the city, so I started looking at the Canadian forces, but I opted to go to the American forces. They promised a little bit more travel than what the Canadians were offering at the time.
Did you ever expect to go to Vietnam?
No, actually, I'd never even heard of Vietnam when I joined. It was 1963. I still think it was called Indochina at that time, but I wouldn't swear to that. But no, I didn't. I didn't volunteer to go to Vietnam.
I guess, can you recall your first day there?
That's first day in Vietnam.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, absolutely. We landed on the beaches of Quy Nhon. It's one of the major ports along the eastern coast of Vietnam. We marshaled into the airfield there and were transported by helicopter to our fire base up at An Khê. And that was basically my first taste of combat. On our trip inland, the helicopters were taking small arms fire, and it was a culture shock for sure. It was a scary moment for us. Most of us were only 18, 19, 20 years old, so you can imagine the thoughts that were going through our head. And we knew most of us had 13 months ahead to look forward to. So we were very scared.
Were you there for the whole 13 months?
No, I was there less than 6 months. My tour duty was up. When I got my orders to go to Vietnam, I was home on leave. My wife had just given birth to her first child, and I got a call, get back to camp, you're being deployed to Vietnam. So, no.
So the political environment at that time, did that hinder your wanting to go, or your experience there at all?
Well, like any good soldier, once you get your orders, you go. There was a lot of American lads that were getting orders and leaving and coming to Canada, or in other words, draft dodgers. But I felt it was my obligation. I signed up for 3 years, and I signed up, and that's what I was going to do. I was going to finish out my tour. Did I want to go? No, I just had a new baby, but those were my orders, and that's where I went.
How long were you serving before you went to Vietnam?
2.5 years. I was due to get out January 6, 1966, and I got my orders in June. June 13th is when I got my orders to go over. So it took us a couple months to get ready, and we went over by ship over to Vietnam. So it took us 32 days on the boat to go over.
Now, when they trained you, was it something completely different than what you thought? Do you think they were pushing you a little too hard during training, wondering why would you need this type of training for anything? Like, they never really told you where you were going at first.
Well, our basic and advanced infantry training were just normal boot camp, if you will. Then I went to airborne jump school, became a paratrooper, and then went to the 101st Airborne Division in Fort Campbell, Kentucky. I was there for 2 years when I got my orders to join the 1st Air Cav. My MOS, or my job qualification at the time, was critical in Vietnam, so they needed radio operators over there, so that's why I had to go. Normally they wouldn't take a short timer like myself. Really, I was going to re-enlist. I wanted to stay in the Army. I loved the Army. I loved the discipline. I loved everything about it until I went to Vietnam and people started shooting at you. That kind of curtailed that activity.
What was the hardest part about being there?
Being away from the family. Obviously losing some very close friends. The people in Vietnam were beautiful people. The country is a beautiful country. Unfortunately, it was war-torn at the time. The communist North were trying to take over the independent South, and we tried to stop that.
So in comparison to then and now, I guess what would you say to convince somebody that these parallels are gonna, like, they continue to happen? Why do you believe that that continues to happen?
Because even the difference, his while the countries and the times are different, the mindset, therefore the encounters are identical. Okay, so it took him 32 days by ship. It took me 72 hours by plane. I flew from Trenton to Edmonton to pick up the tankers, the Strathconas, then from Edmonton to Germany, Germany to Dubai, Dubai to Afghanistan. So you're on, I can picture him on the ship. I know what happened. If he knew the guys that he was with, they were sitting there smoking and joking. And they're talking about what's going on. Can you believe we're actually going? What are you waiting for? What are you expecting? What is it going to be like when you get there? And then when you arrive in the port, because he talked about the port, when did you arrive? What season was it? June.
September.
So was it hot?
Oh yeah, very hot.
Okay, so when I get off the plane in Dubai in February, it's hot. And they open the doors of the Hercules, because that's how you fly into Afghanistan. And you look left, you look right, you got your body armor on, and you're soaked. You are just soaked, and you smell the smell of jet fuel, diesel, and this new smell of the desert. So when the doors open, you know you're not at home anymore, and the sights and smells and sounds are different. And there's a welcome to the base sign, and you're met by an officer. Like, I can go through the whole thing. You're met by an officer who gives you the you shall do this, you shall do that, you shall not do this, you shall not do that. Ammunition's issued, weapons check, confirm you got all your kit, move over there, wait for further instructions. Soldiers go to ground. So I can see him sitting on the dock, laying on his kit bag, trying to find all his stuff, the same thing that I did, waiting to get on my plane and go to Afghanistan. So it's the experiences, different times, different conflicts. It's all the same stuff. It repeats itself with every soldier whenever they're deployed. You know, like he talks about small arms fire, I got rocketed. So like I said, it was about 9:08. And my experience is different. We went to Tim Hortons, because there's a Tim Hortons in Kandahar. They flew a trailer over. The Chief of Defense Staff, General Hillier, always stomping around and talking about the boys, said, what would you like? And Tim Hortons stepped up, and the trailers, when they are renovating a Tim Hortons in Canada, it's over there in Kandahar. So we arrived, and the mess was closed, so we went and got a coffee. So I'm sitting outside Canada House, which is the recreation area, and we get rocketed. So we're the new guys. Okay, so the old guys who are getting ready to leave are just like, more rockets. Completely cool as cucumbers. We hadn't been there 24 hours, so the expression on my face and the other soldier that I was with were completely different than the guys who were leaving. And I can see that where he was. If that helicopter pilot was at the end of his tour, he was used to small arms fire. No big deal. But as a new guy, when these rockets came in and the sirens went off, man, oh man, what am I doing here? What have I got myself into? But like I said, I've got this picture in my head of, you know, you're looking out the window of the plane, he's looking out the porthole of the ship. You talk to your buddy and go, wow, we're not in Kansas anymore, are we? You know, it's the same thing.
We could hardly wait to get off that boat and their ship. It was, I hate it. It was nice going across the Pacific. We had some stormy weather, and I'm not a good sailor by any means. So I was more than happy to get off that ship. But when you put your feet on ground and then start getting fired at, it's different.
Yeah.
So the weather, you were in a desert, you were in a tropical forest, basically.
Very, very tropical.
Yeah.
Although I was one of the luckier ones, because our division was, at the time, we're in the Central Highlands, so it was a little mountainous and not near as hot as down in the Delta, down around Saigon, down that way. So, but you still had the monsoon rains, the constant rain. Rod Stewart's song, I can't even remember the name of it, about have you ever seen the rain?
Yeah.
Boy, I seen the rain. You know, it just rained for weeks on end. And I was talking earlier about you're always wet, you know, and your feet turn green from the jungle rot, we always pack extra socks with us. Your feet, for an infantry soldier, your feet are the most important thing, along with your weapon. So you had to keep your feet dry, but it was just impossible walking through rivers, creeks, and whatever. And then Mike and I talked earlier at another event about the snakes. And, there was snakes over there. They were everywhere, and me and no shoulders don't see eye to eye. Let's put it that way.
And for us to get off the ground, like I said, I arrived in February. This would be about, I'm a Celsius guy, so it would be about 70 degrees Celsius in the day. And then it would drop cold enough in February there'd be frost on the vehicle's windows. So you had to wear a coat, you had to wear long johns when we go out on a mission at night. But during the day, it was pleasant. And then one day in about May, somebody turned the heat on and they didn't shut it off until I left. We had, I think I kept a running notebook. I think we had 6 days of rain when I was in Afghanistan. And some of the pictures I have, our biggest fight was dust storms, because the dust would come up and our vehicles were diesel and turbocharged, and they'd suck the dust into the intakes, and the machine guns were always dusty, and you were just, your teeth were dusty, your eyes were dusty. It was just a grit and a dust that was always, ever present, always there. You'd go in and have a shower. You'd come out. I remember one day watching this dust devil come on, and ducking it in Afghanistan. I'm going, I'm going to beat you back to my shack. So I'm running, and it hit me. So now I look like I've been rolling in the mud, because I'm still damp from my shower, and I'm covered in dust. I went back and had another shower. But it was just, oh. And when he talks about the snakes we had, if it crawled in Afghanistan, we were told it was poisonous. So snakes, millipedes, centipedes, camel spiders, you name it. It was some of the stuff that, it's not, it's funny, it's not the guy who's shooting at you that really scares you. It's this big bug that won't back away from you, that's closing distance with you. What are you doing? You know?
For you joined up for the U.S. Army.
Right.
Now, did you find that they may have treated you completely different than you joined up for the traveling, which we weren't doing as much of? But did you notice that their troops were actually treating you a lot different because you're Canadian?
No, I think they treated us better than some of their. Remember, going back in those days, there was enlisted personnel who actually joined the service, and then those were of the people that didn't enlist but were drafted. And I think they treated us a lot better than the draftees did. Yeah, we were very well taken care of. They treated us very good down there.
Now, roughly about how many Canadians have you know that would have joined the U.S. Army around that time?
At the time, I know my brother was in the service, in the American service. At the time, I didn't know there was any other Canadians that were going into Vietnam. I knew there was 3 or 4 once I got over to Vietnam, but I didn't know them. But come to find out that over 40,000 Canadians crossed the border and joined the U.S. forces. And as of coming up on July the 6th, we're adding 3 more names to the Vietnam Memorial down on the river, and that'll bring it to 128 Canadians that were killed in Vietnam, that we know of.
Just recently, they've recognized you as a veteran, correct?
That's correct, yeah. The Ontario government has, with giving us the poppy plate that Mike had touched on earlier. And it was a big plus for us. I mean, that now we're being considered as veterans. Therefore, although our federal government still does not recognize us.
Really, still?
Well, when we joined the Army, it was against the law to go join another force other than the Canadian force. It was against the law, but nobody ever did anything about it anyway. But we've heard the names. They called us mercenaries, baby killers. You know, but Canadians and Americans have been joining each other's armed forces since the Civil War. Mm-hmm. I don't know how many thousands of young men and women came from the States during World War I and World War II to join the Canadian forces, because the American forces weren't in the war yet. You know, I don't remember anybody calling them mercenaries, so, you know, why pin that on us? Because that's not what it was about. Theoretically, like, the Canadian forces were not in Vietnam, other than there were peacekeepers there with the
Control Commission.
and there was 8 of those peacekeepers that were killed in Vietnam. And their names on our memorial down on the river also. But no, our federal government doesn't recognize us at all.
Now my question for both of you is, during training, do they give you a history of everything? Because as me, I know basics from what I've learned in history, but do they give you a history of what the Army or the military have actually been through, what Canadians and the Americans beforehand? Because you'd probably know more about the Canadians before you went over to the American Army.
Well, I served, my Army career basically started when I went into high school, and at that time cadets were mandatory. So I went to the cadets. I went to Camp Ipperwash for the summer months, 2 years in a row. I joined the Essex and Kent for 2 years until I was out of school, and like I said before, there was no jobs here in the city, and actually the travel and the military discipline, I enjoyed it, so I went to the American side.
And did they do any history, like telling you about their past wars?
Oh, for sure, yeah. I mean, they drilled that into us pretty good. But whereas the Canadian, the Americans, are we different? No, we're all the same soldiers, you know.
Same thing with us. When you join a regiment, you get to know the regimental history because the battle honors are enshrined on the colors of the regiment. So to know the history of your regiment is to know what goes on. And as Wayne said, with the Essex and Kent Scottish, that's directly tied to the history of the city. If you look at multiple names in the city and parks, like I can tell you Senator Crowell Park downtown, why it's named after him. He was a mayor in the city of Windsor. He was 44 years old, and he decided that he needed to leave and become a private in the Essex Scottish then. And people said, "You can't." He said, "I shall." And off he went. Or you look at Dieppe Park. Why is it named after Dieppe Park? Because the regiment that we belonged to, when they landed there, they were slaughtered. And there's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. So to not know the history of this regiment is to not know the history of this city. And it's when you join the regiment, you walk in and you see the battle honors there. You can go and I can tell you what happened at the Hochwald where Fred Tilson won his Victoria Cross. Because to join that regiment, it's important to know that, because when I was on parade with Fred Tilson, I was amazed at the fact that I've been on parade with a Victoria Cross winner. And you get to know the history of all of these things. And also, I also think this, is that people who join the Army are a different kind. Good different. You know the history because you're interested in it, and you want to belong to something that's bigger than yourself. And you know, you could have become an auto worker. You could have gone to Montana and wrestled cattle. Well, you joined the Army, and there was also a decision where they said, "You want to be a paratrooper? You want to volunteer for a little bit tougher training? Well, why not?" So there's things that soldiers know or learn about, and like with me in Afghanistan, I watched the Russians invade. I was around in '80 when the boycott of the Olympic Games took place. And I remember reading over and over and over and over again about what was going on in Afghanistan and how upset I was that the Russians had pushed into this country. Because then, you've got to remember, there was no internet, there was only 6 or 7 TV channels, there was no satellite, so we would sit, we would read a lot more, and we would get our information, form our opinions that way. So while I'm not going to suggest to you that I know the entire history of Afghan conflict from start to finish, I know what I experienced from '79 to now. And as far as the history of regiments and things of that nature, it comes second nature with a soldier. You belong, and they always tell you that you belong to something, and you are tasked with keeping a sacred trust with these guys that went before you. And the only way that you know it's a sacred trust is to know what they did. So once you know what they did, it's beholden on you to ensure that you do nothing to embarrass what these other gentlemen have done before you. So you have to know your history in order to preserve it and protect it.
That's right.
Coming back from that kind of experience, a lot of people know that it's not easy. What did you have to deal with coming back from from both of your
having
tours?
survived the horrors of war, but then when you get back into the world, you go through a whole new experience. Mike touched on it earlier, the adrenaline rush is not there. So post-traumatic stress disorder is a big thing. Both the Vietnam vets coming back and the Afghan vets coming currently now. I know I went through, or I put my family through hell with the, I guess my uncertainty, my guilt feeling that I had survived them horrors, and some of my buddies didn't make it back. The anger, coming back with the restless nights, the chills and the sweats, and getting angry at the kids for no apparent reason, that type of thing, you know. So PTSD is a big part of coming back in. And now, currently, they didn't have anything when I came back. We didn't have people to talk to, any psychiatrists or anything to talk to, where I may not have, I could talk to him, but I wouldn't take it out on my wife. And unfortunately, she went through a lot of hell too. Currently now, Mike's situation is a little bit different. The governments are currently, both in the American and the Canadian forces, when the guys get back here, they're automatically starting to see people, counselors, psychiatrists, psychologists, whatever you want to call them. And I think it's a good thing. People are talking about it a little bit more. You know, when I came back, we hemmed it all inside, and sooner or later it was going to blow, and a lot of times it did.
I think the first couple of weeks, you always had your weapon. I was a section commander. So I had my rifle with a grenade launcher, an M203 underneath, a pistol, eight rounds of M203, 14 magazines, some hand grenades, and you look around and you felt naked for a little while without that weapon. Not because of anything else, but because for 6 months, that was the most important thing, second only to your buddy across there, was where's my weapon? So when you turn it in, we turned our weapons in before we came back, and you didn't have it, you felt horribly naked. I think the other thing for me, for a lot, is sounds and smells. A lot of the helicopters that moved, a lot of the stuff were Chinook helicopters, the twin rotor helicopters, and they're now flying out of Selfridge. And I find that at night or early in the morning, I was actually, a neighbor of mine's a Vietnam veteran, and he and I were talking. And while we're talking, a Chinook went upriver, and I could hear it, and I knew it was a Chinook, and I knew which way it was going. I knew where it come from, and I could hear the helicopter, and you know, we both stopped talking, and we both started to go back to helicopters and that sort of stuff. And for anybody else, that would have been completely abnormal. For both of us, his experience was 60 whatever, mine was 2,000 whatever, but that helicopter flew over, and we were both back there. Now, when the red Coast Guard helicopter goes up, different.
Yeah.
During the Red Bull air races, that stunt helicopter was a Messerschmitt helicopter, and that's the British used for their tactical reconnaissance. So that helicopter has a different sound. So as soon as I get down there, I hear this, and I'm back in Afghanistan again, because sight, sounds, and smells. So diesel fuel, our vehicles are all diesel. Diesel fuel. Kandahar does not have a water reclamation plant, so they have these huge cesspools where all of the wastewater goes. So the smell of the base in and of itself was a very, very unique smell. The smell of our vehicles, imagine 6 people in a vehicle, 164 degrees, what that vehicle smells like. So there's smells that trigger remembering. There's sounds that trigger remembering. I didn't drive for the first 3 or 4 days because every time we drove, we were getting ready to be blown up, right? So I just figured, you know what? Rather than put myself in a circumstance or a situation where I'm going down the road and all of a sudden something happens, oh, this is not my wife drive. No big deal. It's just you do things differently there than you do here, and you have to unlearn everything you just learned to keep yourself alive. And people sometimes have a difficult time understanding why you undo certain things, or you don't do certain things a certain way, you know. And there's batteries. For a long time I wouldn't throw batteries out. We didn't throw batteries out. They went to a battery collection point because the batteries were used to make the IEDs. So even though I'm home, I would take the batteries out of the remote control and stick them on the table. My wife would yell at me, and I'd just say, okay, you know what, no big deal. But it's teeny little, it's very minute things, sight, sounds, smells, and learned behaviors that it's very difficult for it to go away. Like I said, you know, it's sweat and diesel. That's not a very common smell, but when I've got it in my nose, that's exactly where I am. I'm back inside my carrier, and that's what we're doing. You know, and it's not for me. It's not a bad thing. It ties me with those guys that I serve with, that I can, you know, get on the computer and say, do you remember this smell? Remember this day? What did it smell like? Oh yeah, I remember it. Like, you know, burning tires or burning car or burning automotive foam. It's a very unique smell. So you've got to learn that it's not there anymore. And the survival skills that you have, they don't just shut off when you arrive at home. You just don't go, okay, no one's shooting me anymore. I can become red alert all the time. It takes a while to, you know, slow down. I still don't think I've slowed down. I still don't. I just, you know, it's that constant sort of, because you had to be hyper vigilant and hyper alert all the time. There was no, let's relax, let's, you know, even in your relaxed mode, you still had your weapon with you, and there was still a threat that someone's going to fire rounds at you, so you're still hyper vigilant. And it takes a while for your body to actually turn the clock back and you just relax and just be completely the way you were before. Not that it's a bad thing, but it takes a while.
Okay, you talked about when you came back home, you couldn't talk, you're a little more aggressive, you're freaking out sometimes for no reason. Did you have that fear? Because in history, I remember learning about that. Now, when you were told you're going home, the only thing in your head is, yay, I'm going home, for both of you.
Yeah.
But did you guys both have that fear, that, especially for you, for knowing the history behind everything, did you guys have that fear of being scared of freaking out for no reason, not knowing what's going to happen when you get home?
What the Canadian Army does when you leave Afghanistan is they don't fly you right home. Okay? You do what's called decompression in Cyprus for 3 days. So they fly you from a war zone to another war zone, because Cyprus is still technically a divided island. But what they do there is they put you up in a nice hotel. You go to decompression classes and sessions on how to deal with things. And ironically, you drink your face off. And you get it done, because at the end of those 3 days, the last thing I wanted to do was have a beer. So and most soldiers hated decompression in Cyprus, because you could see the end, but the Army still had me for 3 more days before it was done. But when I got home, I was so tired and so hungover that the last thing I wanted to do was to have buddies show up with a couple of cases of beer and do war stories. So, whether they knew what they were going to do with me, I'll just use my own example, is that when I got home, I sat on the couch, and I was bloody glad to be home. I didn't want to drink anything, because I was sick of drinking, because Afghanistan's dry, so there's no booze. So, you know, because when you get out, the first thing you do is, I'm going to have a lot of beer, a ton. So now I look at how I conducted myself in Cyprus, if I'd done that when I'd gotten home. And I'd said to my wife, hi, sweetie, 2 cases of beer, and by 3 o'clock I was out, you know, it would have been bad. So for me, it was just, you know, I got home at 2:30 in the morning on the 4th of August, and when I got home, my entire street was decorated. It was awesome. So I'm standing out there, and I'm looking, I'm going, my God, who's this for, these nutty neighbors of mine? But it was awesome. So my homecoming was, everybody in my neighborhood celebrated my homecoming. And I was, you're blown away. You just figure I'm going to sneak into the house quietly, and you look around, there's banners up, and I'm going, what's going on? Who the hell's showing up? And then, you know, if they tell you it's for you, it's a very heavy moment. when people do stuff like that for you, you know, stuff. Mine was pretty good. Mine was good. And there's still, those signs are still up, which is just bizarre that they, almost a year later, they haven't taken them down. So, and even though we moved out of the neighborhood, they're still there. So I'm kind of like, what are you people doing? You've got to do something with these signs. But it's how people welcome you back, right?
Yeah. And on the Vietnam side, because it was a very unpopular war, we didn't get the homecoming. And that's why maybe the people nowadays, they know what the Vietnam vets went through. We've got to make sure that the guys coming home now are welcomed home properly.
Yeah.
I know the Vietnam vets.
Thank you.
I don't know if you've ever seen them, but if you ever see any Vietnam vets greeting each other, it's a handshake and a big hug, and they whisper in each other's ear, "Welcome home." In other words, we didn't get the welcome home from our government and everybody else, both American and Canadian side. We welcome each other home. So, but I'm glad what these guys are getting now, and they deserve more. They really are. With some of the committees that I work with, we're trying to find out exactly when these guys are going to be stepping off the trains or the planes or buses, whatever, and make sure that there's somebody there and thank them for doing what they did.
Because it's a good thing. The first person you see when you come back from Afghanistan in Canada is Canada Customs. Okay, so you land in Fredericton. I landed in Fredericton because I was with an East Coast battle group. So all the guys that were from the coast would get on another plane and go wherever they needed to go. And you walk down a hallway, and I took about 8,000 pictures when I was there. And there's a sign, the standard black and gray Canada Customs sign that says "Welcome to Canada." Well, I looked at that sign, and it's just. It's unbelievable. And the customs officer goes, "Citizenship, Canadian, we're all in our tans. We just come off military flight. Citizenship, Canadian. How long away? Too long. Anything to declare? Yes. Afghanistan sucks." And they would laugh. But you know what? It was a really nice welcome. And that black and gray sign, like there's very poignant things I get emotional about. That sign was awesome. You know?
You see some of the commercials now. I haven't seen it on the Canadian TVs, but in American, where the soldiers are getting off the plane and walking through the airport, and everybody stands up and claps.
Mm-hmm.
You know, that's a welcome home.
Yeah.
You know, and that's what these guys deserve. So.
Yeah.
You both deserve that.
Mm-hmm. What would you like to say to somebody who has no idea about what you've been
If
through?
you were going to go to a school to talk to them about your experiences, to a grade school, say you're talking to your children, what would you tell them to help them understand why we had to go, why we did this, and why it's being done?
Mike touched on it earlier. We know what our World War II and Korean veterans went through, and a lot of our peacekeepers back then too. We know what they went through, and we don't. I guess if you go back to World War I, that was supposed to be the end of all wars type thing, but we know that's not going to happen. That's not reality, and if we can, in other words, fight on their land and not on our land. You know, like my children, my grandchildren. You know, I want them to be safe. You know, their rights of free speech that Mike touched on was a classic. You know, it was your right to demonstrate because of these guys that went before you. That's about all I can say about that.
I think for me, I have a box that I kept a lot of stuff from Afghanistan in, and the reason is because, like I said, when I left, my daughter was 6 months old. So, as a father, I have to look back and one day, I'm sure we'll get into an argument and she will throw that back at me. And that's when I'll go to a box. And I got a letter from a kid in Mayerthorpe, Alberta. And we wrote each other, because the mail was really quick. And it's one of these deals that I think that when you get a school child, a 6-year-old, school project, whatever, the first letter is the project. The second and third letter is not the project. So you look at what people do for you Police department. Talk about the police department. The chief secretary had a box while I was gone, mail for Mike. If she's a chief secretary, I'd like to believe that she's pretty busy, really busy, and that what Mike's doing 10,000 miles away in the global scope of her day doesn't always rate at the top of her list. Every 3 weeks I got a package from her. Whether it was her writing a letter or clippings from the newspaper. So you start to know that people care. And I think the biggest deal about military service is when you come home, what people say to you when you're back. Not what you do there, because we know what the expectation is to get done there. It's me having veterans plates, and somebody, I tell the story, that stopped at Home Depot. You board your dad's truck? No. Your grandfather's truck? No, man, it's mine. How'd you get veterans plates? Just got back from Afghanistan. Handshake, thank you, guy walks away. I have no idea who he is. But, like I said, that's the stuff that makes me emotional, is that people don't understand how they touch you with teeny little things. The people yell at me, I could care less. But it's the humble, silent people who say thank you and just walk away, and guys go, what am I supposed to say? So I think that it's how you treat, and I use the word warriors, how you treat your warriors in the twilight of their years that shows what your society is about. And how our veterans are treated by our government and by our people will serve to teach our young people what values we have that are important. And like I said, I can't believe I joined this fraternity. It's unbelievable, but it's just, that is what touches me, because I've met some real knuckleheads. I enjoy meeting knuckleheads because I can verbally joust with the best of them, I'd like to believe. But it's the nice people that just stop me dead in my tracks completely. Done. I take a few minutes, I compose myself, I shake my head, I go wow, and I walk in, carry on with my day. But it happens all the time. It's really incredible.
Now, this is my last question. Do you both believe that there will be a World War III? And do you believe that you guys will see that soon?
I personally don't think there will be World War III as we know World War I and World War II. But will there be conflicts all over the place? Absolutely. You got to remember, I've said this before, soldiers don't make war, governments make war. Okay? And if the person who starts the war had to serve in the war, there probably wouldn't be any wars. Will there be a World War III? I hope not. You know, your generation, my grandchildren's, or his kids, and my grandchildren, they don't deserve it. You know, let's hope not.
But, and building on what he said, if the cause is just,
Yeah.
I'm telling you, you'll have a line of a lot of senior people that will sure sign up to go. So while I don't want it to happen, like Wayne said, I'm very much aware that if it should, that there's a lot of people who will answer the call, because that is what soldiers do. We don't, the body politic, the rest of the people are more important than myself. And I acknowledge that when I signed my name on that paper for Afghanistan. Okay, so while I don't want it, I'd be naive to not assume that the rest of the soldiers that I train are trained for it and are willing to deal with it. Not ever wanting to see it happen, but you know what? There's still be a group of people who will stand up and answer the call when the phone rings, and that'll be your regular 18-year-old female or male now.
Yeah.
Will do it because they believe it's the right thing to do.
All right.
Can I say something?
Absolutely.
I want to ask a question now. We've asked this question of several of the veterans, and you've just answered it, but I just want to tell you that we seek this advice from all the veterans. What would a 17 or 18-year-old boy or girl do today if they were called upon for a war? You've just answered it, and it surprised me. Stan Jones told me that, Dan, the boys at 17 today, they'll answer the call.
Absolutely.
And
Yeah.
I was surprised, so it's my ignorance, I would say.
Well, like I said, the young lad that I was talking about, his name's Dallas Curran. He's attached to 2RCR in Gagetown.
Mhm.
He answered the call. Couldn't grow a mustache, never mustache growing contest. He was that young. Looked 12. Okay, but he was there and he did the job.
Wow.
And he did it better, maybe better because he was so young. Could run me into the ground a little so-and-so, but I've seen it and I know that there's more people like him out there.
Absolutely.
That's nice to hear. That's very nice to hear.